Shalom, Salam Alaikum, peace and blessings, everyone watching today. I'm Lale Tansa. This is Dr. Zahir and Rabbi Lee Wiseman, and we're here from Universal God Message of Peace, part of our weekly Abrahamic dialogue sessions. Last week, we spoke about the Ten Commandments. We listened to Rabbi Wiseman teach us about the Ten Commandments from Jewish perspective. And this week, we're going to be listening to Dr. Zahir teach us about what the Quran says about the Ten Commandments. So over to you, Dr. Zahir.
Okay, thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. The mention, or shall I say the alleged mention of the Quranic version of the Ten Commandments is to be found in the 17th surah chapter of the Quran, which has two names, Bani Israel, the children of Israel, as well as Isra, which actually is a reference to the mention in the surah of the famous journey of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, from Mecca to Jerusalem. And then the details are that he went even further. Now, before I talk about what's mentioned in this surah that has been claimed to be the Quranic version of the Ten Commandments, let me say a few things as a preparing ground prelude to it. The first thing that I would want to say is that the Quran itself does not say that what's being mentioned is the Quranic version of the Ten Commandments. It's an understanding that has become popular amongst quite a few exegetes, those who have gone into explaining the Quran. And I think the reason why they have associated these expectations of the Quran as the Quranic version of the Ten Commandments is that because the number of expectations that have been mentioned turn out to be 10. Although I always remain confused whether they're 10 or 11 or 9. But yeah, I mean, if you count them in one particular way, they turn out to be 10. The other reason is that this surah does talk about the children of Israel as well to begin with. It refers to their history. So that's another reason. And having heard Rabbi Wiseman the other day and his mention of Ten Commandments, I can only say that the comparison between the two parts of God's revelation and the understanding that they are the same is true only to a certain extent. Despite some, as we shall see, clear commonalities, there are differences as well. The other thing that I wanted to say was that, the Quran has surahs, chapters, and there are 114 in all. Out of the 114 chapters, 6 are exceptions, are unique. And the rest of the 108 chapters have been designed to be in pairs. So 2 surahs, chapters coming next to each other, they form a pair. I'm not going to go into the details of what exactly is meant by pairs, but I just let you understand through the example of this surah, 17th surah, Bani Israel or Isra, and the one preceding it, Surah An-Nahl, which is the 16th surah. The two, they form a pair. And there are at least three reasons why they are quite clearly partnering with each other. One reason is, as I said, that they are both referring to some aspects of the history of the children of Israel. The second reason why they are seen to be in pair, forming a pair, is that while in Surah Nahl, Surah number 16, you have one verse which talks about the Almighty's expectations from believers, from the mankind in general. In one verse, the same expectation is then expanded to be spread over something like 17 verses, to be described in a manner which has caused many people to understand. They have been led to believe that they are the quranic version of the Ten Commandments. So that is another aspect of them forming a pair. And the third aspect is that there is a mention of hijrah, migration of the Prophet and his companions from the city where the prophetic mission started from in Mecca to elsewhere. That's one point I wanted to make. The other thing that I wanted to say was that the Quranic teachings, if we follow the Quranic understanding, when I say teachings, I'm referring particularly to the expectations that apply to our practical life. They are divided into two parts. One has been referred to al-hikmah, and the other has been referred to as al-kitab. Now, al-hikmah, which can be translated as wisdom, is actually referring to those aspects of the Almighty's expectations from the believer that are already known to humans naturally by birth. In other words, they are actually those principles of morality and ethics which every human being has been made aware of and is therefore expected to follow. Interestingly, maybe it's a bit of a diversion, but probably it would be an interesting incident that I might quote, that I visited India only once. This was year 2005. And in their city of Bombay, I was asked to address a group of something like 400 participants who belonged to a group of companies, and they're all, senior officials. And a vast majority of them were Hindus. And the topic assigned to me was to talk on ethics and morality. And I did nothing but mention these 10 expectations that the Quran mentions, of course, without telling them that I'm reading from the Quran. I mentioned them in my own language. And I still remember that at the end of my presentation, an elderly participant, probably who was the oldest of them all, stood up and he said that whatever you have mentioned, we do not disagree with you in any of the points that you've mentioned. What I'm trying to say is that that's the kind of universality that these principles of morality enjoy. So obviously the question that arises is, it solves the big problem, by the way, but then a question arises. Let me talk about the the solution that it offers. The solution that this understanding offers is to the big, perplexing, problematic question we were talking about the other day too. That what about a vast, large number of humans, probably the vast majority of humans, who never had a direct experience of getting message from one of the prophets of God? How are they going to be held accountable? And the answer is that there's quite a lot that all humans know by birth naturally. It's only that when prophets come, they further clarify, elaborate, and confirm that what humans have within them, in their conscience, in their nature, is from God. So, what I was saying was that the Quran distinguishes between this part of the expectations of the Almighty and describes this part as al-hikmah. And the reason why it is mentioned is that we tend to forget it. We tend to ignore the expectations of the Almighty that are already there within us. Why? Well, because this life is very tempting. Because the glamour of this life quite often takes us away from the expectations that are there within us, which, let's face it, demand from us that we should go against the desires that we have within us, some of which are indeed evil and base. And those desires are what the glamour of this life causes us to satisfy them. So, the prophets, they come and they remind us that these expectations are from your Creator. They're not there within you accidentally. And probably what is more important is that they also come to tell us, all humans, that you one day are going to be held accountable for the manner you dealt with these principles of morality. The other aspect of God's religion is Al-Kitab, which is Sharia, the law. And the manner, it seems, that the law is distinct from the moral principles, which I'm describing, according to my understanding of the Quran, as Al-Hikmah. The law is based on moral principles. But those aspects of moral principles which humans get confused about, they're unclear. I'll just give you one brief example and I'll move on to a brief description of those 10 commandments, or so-called 10 commandments of the Quran. You see, when you are doing business, there are all kinds of moral expectations from a businessman, which he or she must follow. So much so that in the modern times, most business schools have a very important course that must be taken by all students, which has the title of business morality or ethics in business. In most cases, the course, its outline, its reading material hardly ever includes Bible or the Quran or religious text. The reason is that morality is known. I mean, what exactly are you expected to do in business from a moral standpoint is not something that is debatable. Yes, the nitty-gritties, the details are what need to be worked out, and that's what is discussed. However, there is one aspect of business activity, transaction, deal that has always been debatable. It's debated, it's not agreed upon, which is, if I give you, who is doing business, funds with an expectation that my funds to you will stay intact and no matter what happens to your business, they will not be allowed to be destroyed, to deplete. And not only that, I expect you to give me a definite predetermined increment, which is what is interest, riba. So there was always this confusion, and it's still there, despite the fact that the religious text makes it clear whether it should be allowed or not. So the law, the Sharia, makes it clear that it's prohibited. And the entire Sharia is likewise explaining different aspects of morality which need to be clarified, specified, some questions needed to be answered most clearly. That is what the role of the Sharia, the law, is. Okay, now let me move on to the subject now. It starts from verse 29 and goes on till verse 22 and goes on till verse 39 of the 17th surah, 17th chapter, Bani Israel. It begins with the same mention as has been described in Torah, the Old Testament, as Rabbi Wiseman informed us about. The Quran says, and your Lord has ordained that nobody is going to be worshipped except him. You're not going to worship anyone except him. That's the first and the most important expectation. The second that has been mentioned is that you are going to be good, sympathetic, helpful, kind towards your parents. So that's the second one. The first one has been made mention in just brief, simple words, because the entire Quran is actually describing the expectation of believing in and worshipping one God. No help is to be sought from anyone except him. So, not much of space has been consumed to describe it further. However, as far as the inclination to be kind to the parents, there is some detail that has been mentioned. And, we have been informed that particularly when they grow old, they deserve our kindness. And we ought to make sure that they feel comfortable, and we continue to pray for them while they're alive and even after they have passed away. And we need to pray, Rabbi Irhamhuma kama rabbani saghira. Oh our Lord, be kind to them the same way as they were kind to us when we were young. The third command, or the third expectation, and as I said earlier, it's a moral expectation, emphasized, clarified for the benefit of everyone, is that we ought to also take care of our relatives, particularly the poor relatives. The wealth that we have, a part of it ought to be spent on our poor relatives. Other poor people, they are included in this description, but they are only a secondary in importance. The principle is that the one who is the closest to you is the one who deserves the most. So that's the third expectation. I'm a bit nervous. I have to complete the 10, but I hope I'm going to do it one way or the other. The fourth, and why describing the need for helping out the poor relatives and the other people, poor people. The Quran also emphasizes that we must not spend our wealth extravagantly. There has to be moderation when it comes to spending, because if you're going to overspend lavishly, unjustifiably, then it has to be at the expense of the poor people who are in need of our help. And because we spend too much on ourselves, we therefore are not able to help them out. So the Quran says that those who spend uh, extravagantly, they are the brothers of Satan. And Satan is indeed most ungrateful to his Lord. The fourth mention is regarding uh, staying away from zina. Wala taqrabu zina. Now, zina is extramarital sex, uh, physical relationship. Uh, the fact whether the one who is indulging in it is married or not does not make it any less in degree in its seriousness as an evil. However, obviously, circumstances and situations would differ, and the enormity would increase the more a person loses justifications for getting into it. But the fact that a person is not married, man or a woman, and he or she gets indulged in extramarital affairs, that is also included in these 10 expectations. Uh, there's something that has come to my mind, but I hope that I'll remember after I've completed the tally. The fifth point is that you're not allowed to kill anyone. Um, and yes, there is a question that always comes to my mind. Why is it that this expectation is mentioned uh, after the prohibition of extramarital relationship? Well, there is a reason in the sequencing, but when the Quran describes it elsewhere, it's killing that comes first, followed by zina, extramarital relationship. And I remember Rabbi Wiseman talked about uh, unjustifiable killing, and this is exactly what is mentioned in the Quran as well. That do not kill a soul, allati harramallahu, whose life has been made sacred, illa bil haq, except for a justifiable cause. And the justifiable cause could be either that the one who is killed is the one who himself killed somebody else, and the law took its course, investigation was done, the crime was proved, and then the person was killed. Obviously, this is something which is not prohibited. Likewise, it is also mentioned in the Quran that if an individual or a group of people, they indulge in what is called causing mischief on earth, which is because of their evil designs, they cause the lives or the honor or the wealth of the common people to be at their mercy. They too are to be punished in different ways, and one of the punishments mentioned regarding them is the punishment of them getting killed. But aside from these two, the Quran mentions elsewhere that if you kill a person, it is as if you have killed the entire mankind. In actual fact, this is what the Quran mentions is also mentioned in the earlier books, the Old Testament. And if you save a life, it is as if you have saved the entire humankind. The sixth point is that do not come close to the wealth of orphans. That is, don't come close to the wealth of orphans with an evil intention, which is actually also referring to all such possibilities, wherein there are people who are, like all orphans, vulnerable. And because of their weakness, vulnerability, you are taking undue advantage and, using their wealth or depriving them of their wealth. Then we find the mention of the fact that we have to always fulfill our promises. The Quran says that all promises are going to be asked about. We are going to be held accountable for them. That is number 7. Number 8 is that when you are measuring and weighing for the purpose of selling something, then do it properly, do it in full. It should be balanced, which again obviously is applicable to business as well as it's applicable in all aspects of life. Be fair, be just when you speak. You've got to be fair. There's another mention elsewhere in the Quran where the Quran says, وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا. When you speak, be fair. So that's the 8th one. The 9th one is that don't poke your nose in matters that have got nothing to do with you and you have no knowledge about. Don't speculate unnecessarily about others. Do not take interest in things which are not in your knowledge directly, nor are they of any interest to you otherwise. They're not relevant to you. And finally, the last mention is that don't be arrogant. The Quran says that you can neither break the earth by thumping on the ground, nor can you reach mountains in your height. So be humble humans. Now, these are the 10 mentions of the Quran. There are only 2 things that I would like to just say briefly before I end this probably unnecessarily long presentation. I wanted it to be short. One thing is that the manner these 10 commandments or expectations have been mentioned, some of them have been mentioned positively, and some of them have been mentioned negatively. So, at the end of this mention, the Quran says, all these mentions that we have stated, their evil aspects are what are prohibited. In other words, when the Almighty says, be good to your parents, this is a positive mention. So the negative of it is that if you are disobedient to your parents, if you are impolite to them, that is what is prohibited. So some of them have been mentioned positively, some of them have been mentioned negatively, but it's quite understandable that what is prohibited is the negative aspect of the expectation of the Almighty. The last thing that I would just want to mention is that the Quran tells us that the Almighty is going to be kind and considerate, and when it would come to the question of accountability. And if a person would be generally speaking good, truth-seeking, truthful, kind, believer, if he did not commit major sins, then the minor ones are going to be overlooked and forgiven. And the question always arises, what exactly are the major sins? And it seems, and this is the opinion of a few scholars, that these 10 commandments or 10 expectations and their ramifications and the way they apply to different aspects of human life, they are the ones which are major sins. Other than them are minor sins. I think I've done more than what time was given to me. So there you are.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Zahir. That was wonderful. Have you got any thoughts about what Dr. Zahir was saying, Rabbi Wiseman?
I have a million thoughts. I wish I could just import Dr. Zahir into my head. So I just have to put this into words. So first of all, one thing that's interesting is the first thing you said is like maybe there are 10. And by the way, when it comes to the 10 commandments, that's also true. It's only one, depending upon how you count them. I mean, there are different countings of them, and it's a little bit of a stretch, honestly, to say that there's 10. But so that's the first thing. The second is, again, as I mentioned, they're never called commandments, right? The word commandment is used many, many, many times in the Torah, and these are never called commandments, right? They're called statements. And I think that you kind of hit on the reason. And that is that, the word for hikmah is in Hebrew is chokhmah. Okay. It's the same word pretty much.
Okay.
And I think it's exactly because these things, many of them at least, are chokhmah. They're worldly wisdom, right? And they're worldly wisdom, and to that extent, I think that that's what gives them their importance also. And again, delivered without a lot of details, but without a lot of details, and the details can be explained other places. Every single thing that you just mentioned is included in the Torah. That's to say, there's nothing you covered that we would disagree with. There's every single thing is like smack on. Um, in various places, and all would be classified except for the first one, which really has to do with God. But the rest of them are what we would call mishpatim, or the laws that one could derive from one's own intellect. If you were to, we understand when it comes to, when it comes to our parents, okay, it's apparent to us that my joke. It's clear to us that we have an obligation to them, right? That's with obligation. They took care of us. It's quid pro quo in that respect. Being fair in business, we know that if we're not fair in business, we know what's going to happen, right? It's going to be chaos, right? If one person's kilo is bigger than another person's kilo, everybody's going to go to that guy, and it's going to be crazy. Each one of these things really has everything that you said has a human logic behind, that, again, a society in which people habitually take advantage of the most vulnerable is going to be a horrible place to live. Okay, it's going to be a horrible place. Unfortunately, I think many people in the world are living in exactly that place. I mean, there are many places like that all over the world where the most vulnerable are the most disadvantaged. And it's interesting. I think I now understand a comment. There's a comment in the Talmud that says that a non-Jew that keeps the commandments, a non-Jew that studies Torah is as great as the Kohen Gadol. Right? Is as great as the Kohen Gadol, as great as the high priest, right?
Wow.
As great the highest. Now, it's a strange thing to say. And then it says, because he has chokhmah, because he has wisdom, right? Because he has wisdom. And then it says, you might not find Torah among the nations, but you will find wisdom, which I think is the difference between hikmah and kitab.
Yeah.
The specific things that are in the book, okay, you may not find that, okay, but the general principles, the actual wisdom you're going to find in a person who devotes himself to that, right? Because that's what's expected of mankind, right? Mankind is expected to know that wisdom and to practice and to know that wisdom and to practice that wisdom. And that makes an incredible amount of sense. I also liked what you said about riba was very interesting to me too, because I think very often the law comes to help us decide between good and better, right? Because the truth is, from a business point of view, if I'm lending money, right? If I'm lending money, I'm taking my money out of circulation, right? I'm taking money out of circulation, and I'm essentially losing money because that money could be making money for me, right? I could be investing that money in business or goods or whatever else, and selling things, whatever I could be doing with it. And so meanwhile, while it's in the hands of the person I'm lending to, I'm losing money. So therefore it makes sense. They should pay me, they should pay me interest, right? So that would be a good. Right? On the other, right, that would be a good. On the other hand, right, there's also it also makes an opportunity to take advantage of somebody else's need, right? You know, somebody comes to you, they really need money, okay? And you have the money, and instead of saying, okay, I'm going to lend you the money, you think, oh, what a great opportunity for me to make a killing. And we see this in America. We have, I don't know if you have this in the UK. I don't know if you have this in Canada, but we have what are called paycheck loans, which are very, very high interest short-term loans that if you go to any poor neighborhood in America, you'll see these places, and they charge incredible interest because they know people are desperate. They have to pay their electric bill, so they'll pay your electric bill, right? They'll pay your electric bill, but they're going to charge you huge amounts of interest. So that's not a good, right? That the better thing would be for people to lend money without the interest. And so what the law comes and says, look, I understand that there's a good here, but the better, right? But the better is the societal results. By the way, these places cause incredible havoc in people's lives because they can never pay back. It's a horrific business. I don't understand how they charge those rates. I don't understand why it's legal. It's basically legal theft. But it also makes sense business wise, right? I have the opportunity, but you say that this helps create the kind of society we want, right? And even though it may be disadvantageous in some ways, this is what we're going to do. And I think that that's a very good way of looking at the kind of specifics of law. Of course, it's based on those principles. All the rules, business law being one of the most, complex, one of the most complex. I'm very interested in business law. One of the most complex areas of ethics.
Yeah.
But I think you have general principles, and the other thing you said that I think that was very interesting to me is I have to look at the verse because it fascinates me, is where it says, look, I may state this in the positive, right? I state this in the positive, but it also means the negative is prohibited.
Yeah.
Which is a basic, I mean, we have the same basic principle in Jewish law, right? Because sometimes, when the Torah says you respect your parents, right? That also means that means that to dishonor your parents, right, that's a major sin, right?
That's
so
true.
Right, it's interesting. So it doesn't sound, it doesn't sound. I think the idea of a general set of principles, you know, the idea of kind of a general set of principles, probably goes beyond the Ten Commandments and goes beyond this list. You know, I think that there is a hikmah, there's a chokhmah to being a human being, kind of like a kind of universal code that's embedded inside the books, that is different from the Sharia, different from the halacha. It's something of its own. And I think it's also, you know, so now I'm going to be edgy for a second. It's edgy. So one of the challenges is when you can't see the connection between the law and those basic principles, or worse, when one of the laws seems to violate one of the basic principles, or when one of the laws seems to challenge one of the basic principles, which is sometimes happens, where you suddenly look and say, well, okay, that doesn't make sense, you know, like, and that becomes problematic.
Yeah. I think if you allow me, this is a very important point that you've raised, honestly. You, on the one hand, are bound by your covenant with your creator as you understand it, by accepting his text as coming from him.
Right.
And your understanding that your creator can never be wrong. He is obviously more wise and knowledgeable than us. But then he is also expected from us that we understand what he has asked us to believe in and to follow, and to apply it to our lives in the light of the wisdom that he has provided us with. So whenever we are confronted with this kind of a dilemma that you've talked about, which it does happen, I mean, let's face it, I think the effort should be to reconcile. We cannot let go the law, we cannot let go the text on the one hand, but then we also cannot do away with the real spirit on the other.
Right.
And I think that's what really expects us to discuss as well, to remain open-minded, to on the one hand not be disobedient to the creator, but then also not lose sight of the fact that you know, the wisdom that has been given to us is also from him. So
Right.
they cannot be at odds with each other. So I think you've raised a very important point, and I think this is something which must continue to be looked at while understanding and explaining God's message to the people, which is unfortunately sometimes it's not done. And my understanding is that's why some people become rigid. People do not sometimes have the, call it, open-mindedness or honesty to admit that, look here, I really don't understand it. I'm trying to give an explanation. The text says what it says, but there is a problem. And obviously, I think that's the way I think our Creator God wants us to continue to understand His text.
Right. I think the challenge for us sometimes is acknowledging or deciding whether or not there's kind of when there's an ethic that's independent of law. Meaning to say, like, we know there are rules, right? I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very big example. Very big example. So I was once with the greatest expert in business law. He was former chief economist for the State Bank of Israel, and he's a rabbi. And he's really the foremost expert on Jewish business law. And I was his driver for a couple of days.
Can you mention his name?
Yes, yeah, Rabbi Tamari, Meir Tamari.
Rabbi Tamari. Okay,
Yeah,
Tamari.
Tamari. And he's written a bunch of books. He's an amazing person. And I took him, and we had all these meetings with business people, and everybody asked him the same question. Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to? And finally, he just got frustrated. And he said, look, he says, first, there's a difference between what you're allowed to do and what you should do. Okay. He says, I might tell you you're allowed to do something. It doesn't mean you should do it. Okay. And he said, the second thing is, look, he says, the Torah says, Ve'afta re'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. He says, anything that I might tell you could do that violates loving your neighbor as yourself, that's something you shouldn't do.
Wow.
He says, and everything in business law is contained in love your neighbor as yourself. So if you're going to do something, if you could do something which is going to cause harm to another person, it's a question like somebody was talking about market share, right? About I want to get such and such market share. And he said, look, you're allowed to talk like that. Okay, you can. He says, but your job is not to put somebody else out of business. Your job is to make money. But your job is to make a living. Your job is not to take a living away from another person. So he says, I'm not going to tell you that it's illegal for you to talk like that, but I'm going to tell you that it's unhealthy for you to talk like that, and that it's not good for your soul to talk like that, because your job is not to take something away from somebody else. Your job is your job. In fact, if you can do business, and at the same time you can help other people at the same time to be prosperous, that's the best. And so therefore, there's a big distinction, especially in business law. There's a big distinction between the overarching ethic, which is, I'm here to make a living, and I'm not here to take a living away from anybody else, right? And what you might be allowed to do by the law, because the law is developed for all sorts of situations and all sorts of contingencies, and therefore you can always find loopholes. I mean, there's where there's a will, there's a way. And it happens with lots of other areas, lots of other areas also. And
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you've said. Dr. Lale, you would like to say something?
Well, I've really enjoyed this. It's so nice to sit here and listen to you both talking about wisdom and law from a quranic and a Torah perspective. I've got lots of thoughts going on in my mind. I'll come up with a question. So my understanding is that there is the law, but my understanding is that there may be a different law for a different group of people, because God made, covenants with the children of Israel, a covenant with the children of Israel that was perhaps, different to the rest of the nations. And in the Quran, from what I recall, it says, to each of you we have prescribed a law and a way. So follow something like this. I may get the words wrong, but follow what was, revealed from your Lord. So my understanding is that God asks from us whatever he has given us, from whatever he has given us. So according to the revelation that was given to us. And so, the people of the book, those who call themselves Christians should perhaps, judge by what was given to them through the teachings of Jesus, peace, or Yeshua, or peace be upon him, whatever we want to call him, but Isa in the Quran. And the children of Israel should judge according to what was given to them, and that the followers of the Quran should judge according to what was given to them. However, I find it really interesting because the book in the Quran describes itself as a book of hikmah or hikmah, as you say, wisdom. And yes, there are rules in there, and commandments from God. But would you say it is a book of law, or could it be that actually the Sharia should be perhaps based on the previous, what was given to the children of Israel, because the Quran confirms that God gave them much of knowledge and and that everything was in the Torah, and so many times the Quran talks about the children of Israel. It's like an obsession. I think God loves the children of Israel very, very much, and there are times where there's moments of it says things that obviously people might get offended, but actually I think this comes from a place of love. And my understanding is that the Quran addresses the children of Israel to return to the Torah, or to keep the covenant that they made with their creator, that special, that covenant, that expectation that God that has from them to do something that might be different to what he expects from the rest of the world. What are your thoughts about that?
What you've done is you made my job really difficult. Quite apart from other reasons, because of the fact that now we are running out of time.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Perhaps we can talk about.
Let me briefly say what I want to say. And I think what you've done is that you have outlined certain topics. Difficult they may be, but for our future discussions. And I was actually, thinking exactly on those lines when I asked you to make comments. And I just briefly make a comment, and would expect that in the future discussions, inshallah, we will delve into it in more detail. Let's face it, there is this very difficult question of people belonging to different religions. And we know that in our traditions there are many people who claim that they are on the right path and the others are not. Quite clearly in our conversation, what is emerging is that that's not true. God loves all human beings who are doing the right things. Mm-hmm. What does the right things mean is something that we are talking about, that we know it from within ourselves because of the nature that we have been designed with, and also what we have heard from wise people around us. My understanding is that when a chosen prophet of God comes in person, and he is there in the midst of people, letting them know what the message of God is that has been revealed to him, I think the people around him have no choice but to accept him. Why? Because him being from God is so very clear because of his personality, charisma, piety, honesty, the signs that accompany him, the clarity and confidence with which he speaks. When he leaves this world, things get different. And therefore, it is not necessary. And by the way, when a person who comes from God is there, my understanding is like a magnet. All good people converge toward him, and all evil people, they draw away. He leaves, and things come back to what I might say to normal, And there are good people and there are bad people claiming to belong to a certain religious tradition. So I think we will talk more about it. It's a message that must get across. I find it, difficult to tell my Muslim brothers and sisters that, that is what God's design is. But I'm pretty much clear from the mention of the Quran that everyone is going to be held accountable in accordance with his, her circumstances, the capacity with which the individual has been sent. But I think these are very important topics, and I hope that we have good discussions with the kind of wisdom that we always get from Rabbi Wiseman.
I look forward to that one. That'll be a lot of fun.
We will. That'll be great.
Interesting. I mean, it'd be really interesting. I think very good.
Thank you.
Hazrat Hashem, inshallah. God bless you both, and thank you everybody for watching. God bless you. Peace and blessings, and we look forward to our next meeting.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom, bye.